Hi, I'm Joanna Clark with Blissful Baby Sleep Coaching, and I am excited to have Chantal Donnelley back with us. I'm hoping that you've had a chance to watch the interview that we did on stress response curve, because right now we are all feeling a higher level of stress, and she's given us some amazing information on understanding it and, more importantly, the tools on help us calm down. But today we are going to have a big conversation about empathy. And obviously we talk about this a lot in our, in our society, but I feel like why I wanted Chantal to talk about it is to really go back to the research and give us some more data on how to foster empathy in ourselves, with our loved ones, and with the outside world, and what's considered kind of good empathy and maybe over empathy is something we're going to talk about. Super interesting. So what I love about Chantal, she has this incredible background. She is a stress response expert, a nervous system expert, a physical therapist, and a resilience toolkit facilitator. And that unique combination makes her very equipped to talk about this mind-body connection. So thank you, Chantal, for being back and helping us understand ourselves so much better during this bizarre time. So tell me about empathy. I want to learn more.
Yeah, so empathy right now with our quarantine families is particularly important, right? So our spouses, our children were in close quarters. And so empathy is becoming more and more important. And it's good to talk about the good empathy, the bad empathy, and everything in between. And I'll explain what bad empathy is, because most people don't think of empathy as being, and it's not necessarily bad, it's ineffective is probably a better term to use. So just to review, last time we talked about that stress curve that you mentioned, right? The stress response curve. And that curve, I wanted to talk about where empathy fits into that curve. So let's just review that very, very briefly. We have on the left side of the curve, we have our calming nervous system. It's known as your social engagement nervous system. And then we come up here and there's a little bit of an energy that lifts up here, and we have something called tend and befriend. And that stress response is a stress response where we reach out to others, try to help others, try to create networks for helping. And then we have a whole lot of pressure and energy that builds at the top of the curve. And that's where our fight or flight nervous system takes over, right? And this is our irritability, our need to move, moodiness. That's where all of that happens. And then we drop down the curve as far as movement and energy is concerned. And we end up over here in our freeze nervous system. That's where numbness happens, disconnection happens. Sadness, hopelessness can happen here as well, right? So that's where what we talked about last time. Where does empathy fit into this curve? The empathy curve is, if we think of this as being a roller coaster ride, the empathy curve is a crazier roller coaster ride. It kind of looks like this, and then it drops straight down a cliff and then peaks right back up again. And I'll talk about that and what I mean by that. So what is empathy? Let's talk about a definition first before we get into where empathy fits on the curve. We all know Brené Brown. She's the empathy expert that everybody loves and likes to talk about. And Brené has a really great definition for empathy. She says that empathy is feeling with other people, but it's not fixing, right? I really like this. There's an animated video that she does, and I think on this email we'll have a link to it. It's only a 2.5 minute video, really great to watch and have your spouse and maybe your children watch. And it's like this cute little animation about when someone's down in a hole and needing help. Empathy is dropping a ladder down and getting down in the hole with them, right? But having a way to help you and them out of the hole, right? And so looking up above and talking down to them while they're in the hole, that's sympathy. That's not empathy. That's not helpful. But also just jumping into the hole without a ladder to help yourself out and to help them out is not helpful either, right? And so we'll go back to that analogy in a minute. So that's empathy. Where does it fit on the curve, and how does it fit on the curve? So in calm, we're patient, we're creative, we can be empathetic, right? And we can be empathetic in a way where we're dropping that ladder into the hole and we're not trying to help, right? We're trying to be comforting, but we're not trying to fix, right? And then tend and befriend is a stress response. There's a little bit of energy to it. There's a little bit of fixing that goes on here, but it's generally defined by empathy, and it's defined by a pretty good, healthy, boundary-full empathy. Okay, that's tend and befriend. Get up into this fight or flight where all the energy is, that frantic energy that we talked about last time. What we know about fight or flight is that empathy drops during fight or flight. Stress decreases empathy. They've done some research, and what they found is that people who were in the research laboratory stressed, they stressed them out, they monitored their empathy, and indeed it did drop. And then when they administered, there's actually a drug that blocks cortisol in your body, okay, which is one of the main hormones that are released during fight or flight. There's the commonly known adrenaline that's released during fight or flight, and cortisol, which is your stress hormone, comes from your adrenal glands. That's released during fight or flight. And there's a drug that blocks it. So they use that in the laboratory, kind of interesting, and they block the people who were stressed out in the laboratory, and then they block it with this drug, and lo and behold, their empathy goes back up. So we know that when you're in a fight or flight stress mode, you have a hard time being empathetic. Okay, and that makes sense. You know, you're irritable. You are having a hard time handling your own emotions. You're not worried about other people's emotions. You're not willing to go there with other people. Okay, now we're going to go down into what we call freeze or shut down, right? And that is synonymous with disconnection with people. And it's synonymous with numbing. And remember last time, I believe I mentioned that your body releases naturally occurring opioids. So that's where the numbing comes from. Interestingly, in this phase, empathy tends to spike, but it's an ineffective, non-comforting empathy. This is the empathy where, if we go back to our Brene Brown analogy, this is where you jump into the hole, but you don't take a ladder with you. So now you and your friend are in there together and you can't get out of the hole.
Okay, so you both feel really miserable.
Right.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, you're feeling, okay, keep going.
So here, let's explain. I want to explain a little bit why this happens, right? And why, if you are in shutdown and you're numb, why would empathy change? Why would it go up but not be effective, right? So they did some really interesting experiments where, let's say you and I are sitting across from each other, and I put my right hand on the table. You're mirroring me, you're sitting across from me, so you have your left hand on the table. So both of our hands are sort of mirroring each other on the table, okay? And the experimenter is going to hurt your hand, okay? So when that happens, I say, oh, that must hurt. I have empathy for you, right? And I kind of flinch and I go, ow, yeah, I don't like that, right? But I know that it's you who's feeling the prick on the hand, okay? Same experiment, we're in the exact same position. This time the experimenter puts a nerve block so that your entire hand is numb, okay? Experimenter now pricks your hand again, same experiment. The only difference is that now you can't feel your hand, right? So sorry, I have it reversed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So you're the one who's like flinching, right? I'm the one who's getting poked, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So you're the one who's numb. I'm the one who's getting poked. When you first are not numb, I got a little confused here. So when
Yep.
you first poke me, when they poke me and you're not numb, you go, ow, that must hurt, right? And you feel for me.
Mm-hmm,
Okay, you have empathy for me. Now your hand is numb. They prick my hand. You feel the pain as if it's your pain.
wow.
So what we
That,
call that is boundaryless empathy.
yeah, boundaryless.
Okay.
Boundary. I like literally like we are now one, and I am feeling, I am right, like again, like that analogy that we're both now in the hole. We're
Both
both
in the
like
hole.
I'm confused by your pain versus my pain. I don't know whose pain it is that I'm feeling. Is it
You
mine and
feel
my
that my
word?
pain, you feel like my pain is your pain.
Okay, so I feel like my pain is your pain. Yeah. And I could see where that would be very ineffective empathy, right? Because now we're both in the hole and we can't help each other. Whereas when we have effective empathy, I I have I have the ladder. I understand you. I feel for you. You know I am there with you, and I have the ladder to help you climb it. But if ineffective is that we're both in the hole and we're both looking at each other feeling miserable
Mhm.
and not understanding why we're both feeling miserable necessarily.
Right. So
Okay.
you've shown empathy, but it's ineffective empathy. And
Okay.
both being in the hole without a ladder,
No.
it's not going to be comforting to anybody. So
So give me a really good example of where you might see that between a parent and child.
So there's lots of places in life where people are numb in one area of their life and they're not necessarily in shutdown and numb in another area of their life.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay.
So for you, you have a lot of people you're working on sleep with.
Mm-hmm.
And if a client is feeling a little numb in an attachment area of their life, maybe it's early childhood where they don't feel completely confident with their attachment with their parents, there may be an issue of getting confused that when their child cries that there's a problem with attachment. They start to think that their child crying is their pain,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
And this is very common, and it can be very subtle. It's very normal. And as soon as people can get out of that numbness and start to become more aware of what's happening in their bodies, their stress response to the baby crying, for example, then that helps them to have a healthier empathy.
Because we want to, again, with the stress response curve, if you're down here in the numb, disconnected, and you're trying to be a really loving, attentive parent, it's possible that the empathy you think you are exuding isn't as good as the empathy than if you were over here and feeling more balanced, connected, where then you have true empathy. That is that beautiful, again, the analogy where we have the ladder and we're lifting each other up. So I think that that's so important, because I know for myself, I can even think of some examples where with my daughter, I think we've both been in the hole, you know? And so what this is really telling me, which is why I had you come talk to us about this stress response curve, is that just knowing and understanding this curve, and to always be aware of where are you in the curve, because all day long you're toggling, you're here, then you're down here, then you're back up, right? And the more we know where we are, the more we can then understand how we're responding to our spouse, to responding to our child, responding to our workplace environment, so that we can have healthy responses with the people that we're interacting with. And that if we are down in here and we need to move our way back up, that's when Chantal gave us some really great tools that if you find you're down here because you're having a hard day, like some really quick and easy tools to bring yourself back up, to be in a better space, to allow for appropriate empathy and connection, which is what we want. We want healthy attachment, healthy empathy with our spouses, with our partners, and our community at large. And that's what we're talking about today, because ineffective empathy is not going to get us anywhere. Healthy empathy will.
And you just outlined the two things that you need to do to get to healthy empathy. Number one is being aware of where you are in your stress response cycle. Remember, we talked about putting on your detective hat and really figuring out where you are. And then number two would be finding a way to down regulate, to get to this other side of the curve. And those tools that I taught last time are appropriate. And you may have other tools that you like, whether it's meditation or the self-care that works specifically for you. There's ways to down regulate to bring you into healthy empathy. Excuse me. And interestingly enough, those two things, knowing where you are in your nervous system, that self-awareness, and down regulating, are the two components of co-regulation, right? So co-regulation involves tracking, not only tracking your own arousal state, but the other person's arousal state at any given time. And it's going to fluctuate during a conversation or a period of time, right? So tracking where you are. So your child is crying. Where is your child's arousal state? Where is yours? Is it changing based on the crying, right? Tracking yourself and knowing that it's your arousal state versus your child's. And then the second part to co-regulation is alignment. And they've actually found that in order to align with someone else's regulation in a healthy way, you have to kind of meet them at their arousal state, but then down regulate with them, right? And you don't have to go all the way. It's like if they're way up here in fight or flight and tantruming, or if a toddler's tantruming, you don't need to go up quite that high, but you up regulate just a little bit to kind of catch their attention, and then down regulate, and they will usually follow you, right? That's alignment, that's co-regulation. And it involves self-awareness of your own arousal state, and then aligning with the other persons and down regulating with them.
So let's talk a little bit more about this co-regulation, because I think this is so imperative as a parent of a child, let's say, newborn to maybe age 4, when in the beginning they're nonverbal. And so the only way they can communicate with us is through the various cries that we need to attend to. And then obviously when they're toddlers, you get the tantrums and you get that. And so, when I work with families, so many families are, I constantly hear, I'm really afraid to hear my baby cry. And I ask, well, when does that occur? Now, that feeling of being afraid of their baby crying intensifies as the day goes on, as they are more exhausted from caretaking all day.
Sure.
But they, and then any crying at night is like really hard for them. And I would imagine it's because as they go through the day and they're more tired, and the demands on their time and their energy, they are now, up here heading down here. And so any version of crying that might have not bothered them as much at 10 a.m., even though it's the same type of cry that was at 10 a.m., same type of cry at 10 p.m. just triggers them in an entirely different way, I would imagine, right? Is that what you're saying? And so what happens to a lot of my families is that this idea, I talk a lot about them as like this invisible tether between child and parent, and that how you as the parent are doing matters tremendously, because the child will respond to you if you are stressed out and feeling reactive. and you're up here, the baby actually will end up increasing their crying and getting more intense, which then has you go higher, and then the baby has to go higher. And so they see this happen in real time. But what I'm loving about our conversation is now we understand more scientifically why this happens, because of that example you gave with the two hands. And just knowing where our toleration is, again, like same type of frustration cry from the baby at 10 a.m. is a completely different feeling for the parent at 10 p.m. And that's when I think the parent gets confused about whose cry it is, or what the pain is. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about that? Like, if they're sleep coaching their baby and they're in the room with the baby, and the baby is frustrated because the baby is wanting to suck the bottle and fall asleep on the bottle, or being held, and the baby's frustrated that the dad is sleep training, and the dad will hold the baby until the baby becomes down regulated. And then when the baby's calm, the dad will put the baby back in the crib, and then the baby gets frustrated because the baby wanted to continue to get the sleep crutch. And so sometimes the dad will say, like, I felt miserable putting the baby back down, even though I knew it was the right thing to do because the baby was safe and calm because I'm in the room. So can you kind of talk a little bit more about that, about how that?
Yeah, so feeling miserable is pretty normal in that situation, and the awareness of feeling uncomfortable and feeling stressed out about that situation is appropriate.
Right.
But it's the feeling of that and having that self-awareness that is gonna keep you from, oh, I put the baby down and now the baby's crying again. It's gonna keep you from over empathizing without boundaries, and now being ineffective in your care and in your empathy towards your child, right?
Okay.
But if you don't have that awareness of, oh, this is making me stressed, right? But if the parent has that awareness, that's step number one, that they're doing the right thing. And then if you put the baby down and the baby starts to cry, you feel like you want to soothe the baby, but really you need to soothe yourself.
Right. And then that goes back to the co-regulation, which is then if you keep yourself calm, the baby will match it. And this is true healthy attachment, when we're co-regulating and they're in response, right? And so that's the whole goal of my work as a gentle sleep coach, is to do everything possible to minimize tears and frustration, and to anchor everything we do in attachment theory, behavioral science, and sleep science. And so what Chantal is really showing us is what is that kind of behavioral science and kind of physiological science, that mind-body connection that's happening to us when we're parenting, and how important it is to have healthy empathy, not down here in the hole. And how co-regulation is something that we as parents can foster in ourselves, and knowing that when we regulate ourselves, we are inherently creating a healthy regulation with our child, which is why I want all of you to go back and watch the video on the stress response curve, because understanding that and where you are in the curve and the tools that you can use literally right in that moment are available to you to help you co-regulate yourself, and therefore help your baby, or even help your partner if your partner's having a hard time too, because it's happening a lot right now in the households all day long. So that's awesome. So do you have anything else you want to share with us about?
I think we covered it all.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys, I'm going to put Chantal's information down there. So if you are curious about learning more about your own stress responses, or maybe realizing you have some more internal work to do around this, she is a fantastic resource, and you can join her email list. She's doing workshops. She can work with you one-on-one, and I just really hope that this has helped you. I know, again, it's helped me tremendously in my own life, and I know it's going to help me language some of these concepts to the parents I'm working with. And I really thank you, Chantal, for all of this wonderful information.
Thank you, Joanna. This has been great.
Okay, see you later. Bye.
Bye.